start?
Almost done. Give me one more second.
Start.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we started. Yeah, we live.
Thank you. I will now call to order tonight's session of the Okay, I will now call to order tonight's session of the Planning Commission for the City of Baldwin Park. The time is 7:07 p.m. and the date is May 24th, 2023. Commissioner Vasquez, can you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Sure. May all please stand. Ready, begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, republic for one nation. Justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Washington, can I please get a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Jen Escobosa,
Here.
Vice Chair Eric Pena,
Present.
Commissioner Mario Maciel Jr.,
Here.
and Commissioner Ricardo Vasquez.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open the floor for public communication. Do we have any speakers today?
I have no request.
Seeing none, I motion to close public communication.
I will second that.
Can I please get a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Jen Escobosa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric Pena,
Yes.
Commissioner Mario Maciel Jr., and Commissioner Ricardo Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Moving right along to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve the action minutes for April 26th?
I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Can I
Sorry,
please,
who's second?
Vasquez, myself.
Thank you.
can I please get a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Jen Escobosa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric Pena,
Yes.
Commissioner Mario Maciel Jr.,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ricardo Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we will move right along to the public hearings. So item number 1 on the agenda is the consideration of an amendment to update the City of Baldwin Park Municipal Code relating to the state legislation for objective design standards and Senate Bill 9 development standards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our planning consultant, Laura Stetson, will be providing the presentation.
Please turn the mic on at the podium.
There we go. It looked green. I guess it's blue if it's on. For the record, Laura Stetson, MIG, based in Pasadena, California. What we are presenting this evening are the proposed objective design standards and urban infill lot regulations for the city of Baldwin Park. We met just about a month ago to go over what would be in these draft ordinances. There are 2 ordinances. And so the purpose of the meeting this evening is to see if you have any specific questions about any of the provisions that are in the ordinances. I've got a pretty fast presentation just to go through, and for the benefit of any members of the audience who have not participated in the prior study sessions that we have. So if we could get started with a presentation, I'll just go ahead and say next. I don't think it's in presentation mode. But that's okay, we'll go with this. We mentioned that it's not just the objective design standards and the urban infill lots, but also because of the changes to these 2 portions of the code, there is a requirement that we also update some of the definitions, so it's tied closely to these. Next. There has been a couple of public meetings as well as a survey to get input on the objective design standards. And that dated back to February of this year when we had a meeting with the City Council, followed with a meeting with the Planning Commission, and then a survey that extended through April of this year. I think as part of your packet, you had a summary of the input from the survey. We didn't get a whole lot of participants, not quite 25, I think, but the comments were very insightful. And so it was, for those who did participate, it was nice to see their comments. Next. Let's cover the objective design standards first. Next. For clarification, these objective design standards build on regulations that are currently in the zoning code for multifamily housing. You currently have standards that regulate things like height and setbacks and the minimum size of the individual units. The design standards are additive to that to talk about those things that are currently addressed in your design guidelines, separate from the code. So things like how buildings should be oriented, how the pedestrian paths bring people to the front of the buildings, how you should screen utilities equipment. So these are the things that address the three-dimensional aspects of building on a site, and to make sure that multifamily residences and certain types of mixed-use projects fit well within the established fabric of Baldwin Park. Next. We presented to you last time the outline of the document. There are 4 major sections for objective design standards, starting with site planning, how everything's laid out, building design, what are the details on a building, how are things like landscaping and trash bins and lighting, those things that aren't on the building but complement the building. And then anything additional for mixed-use developments that don't relate to standalone residential are 4th part of that. For example, if you have a mixed-use building with a ground floor commercial or office component, you want to make sure that it relates well to the street, has windows, has things that invite pedestrians in. So those are standards that are additive for mixed-use development. Next. I wanted to touch on a few of the standards just so you can get a flavor of what the new standards are. You will recognize some of these slides from our April study session. But for site planning, the building orientation is very important, and how pedestrian entries are well designated and people can see where they're going into from the street or from a parking lot. And that the pedestrian pathways from the parking lot to the buildings are separate from the drive aisles, and so it's a safer environment for pedestrians. Next. Common open space areas, certain amenities need to be provided to make sure that they're well designed for the residents, and that open space can be both on the ground for common use or private, little patios or as balconies. Next. Objective design standards, ODS, do not dictate a particular architectural style. People have free reign to do whatever styles they'd like to do using a couple of guides, but the ODS do say that whatever style you select, be consistent. So the windows, the doors, the trim, the roofs, everything has to be craftsman if it's craftsman, mission style if it's mission style. Don't start to tack a bunch of things on together that don't match. Next. There are also additional requirements for how the massing of a building needs to be broken up to avoid long blank walls. The building needs to have movement, if you will, in the building. The facade needs to poke out or poke in. You can add detailing like bay windows, balconies, other things to create texture on the front of the building and avoid long blank walls. And so these are the types of things that are addressed in the objective design standards. Next. There are also standards that address the fact that it's nice to have a good transition from the street, so be that a porch or something that's weather protected. Not that we have a lot of weather, differing weather here in Southern California, but when it rains, it's nice to have a little covering or a porch before you go into the building. Next. I mentioned the articulation, those detailing on a building that break up the massing. So I know you probably can't read that at this particular scale, but all of this is in the draft ordinance. Next. I I have a particular fondness for making sure that utility equipment is not placed somewhere that takes up valuable open space area. And if you can screen it, because sometimes those pieces of utilities, be it a electric box or a fire connector, aren't always the most attractive thing. So it's nice to put them at places that they work and they function, but doesn't take up space or detract from the visual character of a development. Next. As I mentioned, there are some additive standards for mixed use. I think the key one is that the ground floor needs to have at least 60% of window coverage. It's not saying exactly how you do that, but at least that there's some transparency onto the ground floor, and that the buildings include some type of space where you can create either outdoor seating areas or places for pedestrians to sit. So things that are inviting to people walking by. Next. I'm going to pause to see if there are any particular questions, or Madam Chair, if you'd rather I just motor through and then you ask questions at the end, I can go either way. Okay.
Yeah, we can keep going forward.
Okay, we're almost at the end here. We mentioned that there was a bill passed a couple of years ago at the state level that allows for 2 units on a single-family lot, and this, or actually more than 2 units. This is different than an accessory dwelling unit. In Baldwin Park, they are called urban infill units. A lot of cities are calling them SB9 units after the law that created them. But this essentially says if you have a single-family lot, there are 2 things you can do with it. You can put 2 individual standalone single-family homes, and each of those can have an accessory dwelling unit. So where you had 1 unit, there could be 4. Or you could split the lot and do an urban lot split and put a unit on each of the separate lots. So either way, you could get to 4 units where there is 1. In Baldwin Park, you've got a lot of smaller lots. It's not going to be possible for somebody to do that because you have to meet the setback requirements and your lot coverage requirements and parking requirements and all kinds of things. So for larger lots, it might work. For smaller lots, it's going to be very challenging for somebody to do that unless they're putting, a bunch of 500 square foot units on the lot. So this graphic shows what could be developed on a lot with these urban infill units. Next. There are regulations that are proposed that conform with the fairly regimented state requirements for these urban infill lots that, like multifamily housing, the city can only apply objective design standards. You have to be very clear about what these look like. There is a standard, lot coverage standard of 45% that controls how large the units can be, or how much square footage each unit can be, as long as it doesn't cover more than 45% of the lot combined. These second urban infill units are limited to 1 story in height. So even if you have a 2-story unit on your property today, the urban infill unit can only be 1 story. And I think importantly, these units cannot be used for short-term rentals, something like an Airbnb or a VRBO. They have to have be rented it for at least a 30-day, more than 30-day period. And that's really to prevent people from speculating and building on lots and just renting them out. Next slide. The legislation is very clear that you cannot tear down what would be considered affordable units that would be rent controlled by some type of deed restriction or other covenant on the property. And so the intent is to make sure that units that are currently affordable today to lower income households are maintained, so that they aren't torn down just to build 2 market rate units. Next slide. If a property owner elects to split a lot, there are further restrictions on what can and can't be done. They can create a lot as small as 1,200 square feet if there's enough lot area to do that. There has to be a connection to a public right-of-way, and so that you couldn't landlock, essentially. If somebody had a long rectangular parcel, they couldn't just cut it in half. You would have to have some type of access to the street, probably via a shared driveway or a flag lot or something that would allow that to occur, or if it backs up to an alley, as long as you had that alley access. And there is a requirement, and this comes from state law, that if somebody splits a lot, the owner of that property has to live in one of the units for at least a 3-year period. This is, again, what I might term an anti-speculation provision of the law, so people aren't just coming in and cutting up lots and selling them. They have to live on the property. And my guess is that this, well, not guess, but there's a requirement that there be an affidavit that the property owner would sign saying, yes, I intend to live there, or I will live there for at least 3 years. Next slide. The staff is requesting, very simple request, that the Planning Commission recommend to the City Council adoption of these 2 ordinances to establish the objective design standards, and also to adopt an ordinance creating urban infill lot requirements and also provisions in your subdivision regulations for a couple of tweaks to allow these lot splits to occur. And that is the conclusion of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. I think we covered a lot at our study sessions, which is good.
So there's no questions from the commission. Are there any comments from the public? Anybody want to speak for or against these regulations? Go ahead.
Question for staff. The presentation, I read one part where it says the housing that's under rent control. How does that work with this particular project? Is it just for rent control on the apartments, or we're talking about single-family homes applied to this?
It would fall what's under our current RSO ordinance. So we would have to work with the applicant to confirm whether, in evaluating the site, whether it falls within or outside of the ordinance.
Oh. What was it?
Pretty straightforward. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out public hearing. Can I get a motion to approve?
A motion to approve?
Second. Second.
Vasquez.
All right, can I please get a roll call?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Janice Gabosa,
Yes.
Vice Chair Eric Pena,
Yes.
Commissioner Mario Maciel Jr.,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ricardo Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The commission finds that the proposed project is exempt from further review under the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to section 15358. And we we recommend the adoption of the resolution of PC 2312, PC 2313, approving AZC 2301, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Baldwin Park recommending that the City Council amend the city's municipal code 15 land usage chapter 153 zoning code sections. Oh, I have to read all the sections.
Yeah.
153.040.070, 153.070.020, 153.10, 153.10, 120.3.350, 153.120.360, and 153.120.370 relating objective design standards and Senate Bill 9. That was a mouthful. All right, I think we can move along to any reports from the officers.
Before we move on, I just want to say that the recommendation of the Planning Commission will be agendized for council consideration at the June 21st City Council meeting.
Do we have any reports of officers?
I just want to report to the commission that our next regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting is for June 28th. So we have a couple of scheduled items on that meeting date. We will be bringing good news. All of us are excited that we'll be bringing the housing element to the Planning Commission for recommendation to the City Council for adoption. Working tirelessly for the past 2+ years. So we're excited to be bringing that to the commission. And we have some other items as well, but of those, we're excited to bring that to the commission. That's all that I have to report.
Thank you. Looking at the agenda, unless there's any other business to discuss, I think we can move to adjourn.
A question. Are there any updates with the appointment of a new city planner?
Good question. That is in process currently.
Thank you.
I'll motion to adjourn.
I will second.
Chair Janice Cabosa,
Here. Yes.
Vice Chair Eric Pena,
Yes.
Commissioner Mario Maciel Jr.,
Yes.
and Commissioner Ricardo Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned at 7:28 p.m.